the first question is to Dr. Amina, and it's one of our sisters who has passed this question on to us. So this commonly understood notion that you mentioned about Muslim women need saving, that seems to be a common narrative. Is it limited to the narratives of right-wing nationalism, or is there also a regular, secular, liberal, democratic narrative, or, including the left as well? Is that something that's generally spoken about?
Absolutely. I'd say that it's definitely, the savior narrative, that colonially rooted savior narrative, is definitely not exclusive to the right. Rather, it's something that permeates the political spectrum more broadly. I'm actually in the process of preparing a chapter that probably be out by 2023, looking specifically at liberalism, at liberal Islamophobia. So in France, in my research in France, we see that sort of manifestation of the liberal Islamophobia. And the way in which it works is that liberalism is centered on the individual rights. So we talk about the individual. Within that framing, the idea is that everybody must have a certain set of predetermined or preconceived liberties or freedoms. And one of these liberties is the liberty to dress in a particular way, but it's a very confined frame of liberalism. It doesn't necessarily always in practice. If we were to take a more philosophical view, we'd see that there should be a broadness of practice, and that should be accepted within the liberal frame. What that liberalism now tends to entail is that we regulate individuals to fit our very confined, narrow view. So in response to the question, it's definitely not something that's restricted to the far right. The idea, sort of gendered Islamophobia, and a lot of the narratives around it do also find space in sort of the liberal left. And I think for me, this signals the alarming nature at which Islamophobia has been so readily normalized. We don't see racism as, and it is a form of racism and a form of sexism. We don't see it as something we typically associate with the sort of hyperconservative right. Rather, it is a normalized thing. And that banal nature, for me, indicates the severity of the issue, but also the urgency of needing to do something to challenge all of this. I hope that answers the question.
It does, thank you. I hope it answers the question for the sister who asked as well. I think we have Ghazia now. Ghazia, would you like to ask your question, please?
Assalamu alaikum. I have a question for Sister Suhaima.
Walaikum salam.
My question is, how do we deal with Islamophobia at our school level from our own classmates? When some of your classmates make fun of you for looking for wearing hijab, or looking at awkwardly for us simply for wearing hijab.
Really, really good question. First off, and second off, I'm glad that you asked that and that it felt like something that you could ask. I would say the first kind of port of call for any of us as Muslims, obviously, is I always think of that ayah that Allah will not change the conditions of people until they change what is in themselves, and I take a lot of strength from that. And I don't mean this to say that I think you must pursue every possible route for justice in your school, right, in your surroundings, whether that's kind of through teachers, through parents, through finding a staff member who you trust. However, we also know that sometimes these methods are not enough, and I think kind of fortifying ourselves in our own iman as well is really important. I think knowing that the words of others, the insults of others is very much part and parcel of kind of the experiences that the Sahaba had, and the kind of realities, I suppose, that have hurt Muslims for so long. So I would say, that's one thing. But the second thing is really just making sure that you have somebody that you can always tell, whether that's a parent, whether that's a teacher, like I say, a youth worker, or anybody. I think you mustn't, don't feel alone in that. Inshallah, there maybe are classmates that at least you can kind of talk to, but I think finding an adult that you can trust is really important. And I think, like we've talked about today, you know, maybe thinking about and focusing on kind of where those narratives come from, rather than kind of because I think sometimes we can spend a lot of our lives trying to just, you know, disprove the kind of insults people throw at us, and we can try to particularly I think environments like school and like work, you know, we want to belong, right? Because belonging is much safer than being excluded. But I think, you know, thinking about also maybe contextualizing why it is that those people are coming where they're coming from, that it's probably not very thoughtful, that it's probably just reproducing things that they've heard. But I have to say I do feel not in a good position to answer this question, because I think it's something that we all struggle with, right? I think the honest truth is that I don't know if anybody has you know, the tools, and that's why I kind of think finding people you trust, you know, finding that, fortifying yourself internally, and you know, kind of trying to contextualize the people themselves and the narratives, inshallah, is something. But more than anything in my life, I suppose the place that I've always found strength is in solidarity with others, is in, you know, knowing that other people have my back, are on my side, and I suppose knowing that Allah is on the side of justice as well. But yeah, Dr. Amina, if you have any thoughts on that, please do respond, and anyone else, because I think that's a really tricky question and quite an important one as well. But yeah, guys,
I think actually your answer's been quite comprehensive. And I think that's it, right? That there are people out there to help you, but having your own kind of safety or security network is an important thing. And I think that goes beyond just kind of examples of gendered Islamophobia. I think it goes for life in general, right? Having those safe spaces and safe networks is a useful tool, I think, to remember. I don't think I can probably can't add more to that, but thank you so much for the question. Very insightful.
Yeah, so the question is to Dr. Amina. Yeah, the question is, recently we had a controversy in India called Suli deals. So the profiles and pictures of Muslim women were posted online in a Hindutva platform, and you know, they were auctioned in a make-believe world. So also as a testimony of probably how otherized or how normalized anti-Muslim hate is, there was not much of a public outcry in the country or elsewhere also, in social media, anywhere. There was very, very feeble reaction to this. So, so my question is, you know, in a fascist context as that of current India, how do we, you know, get back the humanness of Muslim women, right? So what can we do to help our women fight this objectification, abuse, alienation, aggression, all of that? And when I talk about women, there we have a very broad social spectrum. It's a very, you know, we have too much of social inequality. So at least Muslim women from privileged backgrounds, there is at least some sort of safeguard. They are not equally accessible to, you know, elements of hate. So my thoughts are for women from privileged as well as underprivileged circumstances. How can we help them fight for their own dignity and humanness? You know, how can we fight hate?
I'm very sorry to learn of this. The situation in India, it shouldn't, but it continues to surprise me and continues to be upsetting. I guess I have a counter question. To what end were those profile pictures sold? What was the point of it, other than making that spectacle of gendered Muslimness? What can we do? I'm not sure I have the definitive answer, but women that I've worked with through the frame of my research, women across different social spectrum have and continue to be involved in a range of projects, simply existing. I think not even highlighting their existence. Sometimes I think the reality for many of us that is that our simple existence in spaces that we're not supposed to exist, supposed to, quote unquote, that is our resistance. If that is the battle that can be carried out on that day, that is our resistance. And I think the same goes for other marginalized groups. You know, existence is resistance. And sometimes that can be the scope of the fight for that day. But in my own work, I found that women are engaged or exist in a variety of spaces. And sometimes it's about, so one of the approaches I take in my research, without going off on a complete tangent, I'm quite focused in on using qualitative mode. So I'm very interested in Muslim women's voices and not necessarily looking always primarily just at the statistical happenings and that sort of statistical details around hate crime. I'm more interested in understanding what the experiences are for Muslim women on a very interpersonal level and understanding their voice. And I think sometimes this, for me, through the frame of my own work, and this is a tool that exists to me, I guess, understanding voice and showcasing voice is such an important tool in normalizing Muslim presence, but also highlighting those intersectional identities, you know, that some of us are deeply interested in sports or art or dance or whatever. You know, we have these diverse elements of our personalities, and we exist beyond that construction of motherhood that Suhaima so eloquently pointed out. You know, that there are multiple facets of our identity, and I think sometimes finding the space to voice these and to show these as our normal existence can in fact be quite a powerful tool. But I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Suhaima.
I think it's a really tricky question. I think, you know, I guess for me, when I'm kind of in a situation, and I don't know if this is the situation that you're in, but I think really listening to what women themselves are saying they want and need in those situations, whether that's how safety can be facilitated, because I think sometimes when we're not in a context and we're trying to help or support, and maybe there are people that we know that are in that context, sometimes, you know, the best thing is just listening. Okay, what's the kind of, are there practical things we can do? Is it you know, is it just raising awareness in a different context, or is it raising awareness in a specific context about what's happening? Is it validating and kind of just creating a space where you say, whilst the rest of the country refuses to see this violence, we see it? Sometimes, you know, just creating space for, whether that's like an event or whether it's something else or just some sort of solidarity. It's sometimes that really, you know, I think in situations we've seen throughout the, you know, recent years, so many times we are helpless to really transform. In a way, we are to transform really what's happening, but showing up in a kind of manifesting solidarity can be something that's really powerful. But I suppose sometimes asking directly as well, like, what do you need? Is that, what can we do? But yeah, I find that difficult, and I think, you know, yeah, that's why I kind of would begin with maybe just, yeah, those questions personally, but I don't know enough about the context specifically.
I think we have somebody among our audience who would like to add to it. Basita Javeed, would you like to add to it, please?
But thank you so much. So basically, I know about the situation which happened just, it's not been so long since then. So I know about the situation when, you know, these pictures were collected from different social media platforms of girls, Muslim girls, and they were literally fetishized and commented upon. So I basically am from Kashmir and I live in the UK right now. I was contacted on this, you know, basically on this matter, and I was told by my relatives and friends to just, you know, kind of lock my profile and everything. But then that's where your resistance begins. That's when you normalize your presence, that you're not something that you should be, you know, afraid of just being, you know, just afraid of being there and actually being, you know, one of the victims. So that's how the resistance actually, and how we fight this thing. That's how it starts. When you actually, you know, I totally agree with Dr. Amina when she said that we actually have to normalize our presence. So that's what I did as well. I didn't lock my profile, I didn't do anything, and I just said that, you know, I have a right to be. And that's how, you know, you kind of counter this these kind of issues. That's all. Thank you.
This is for like both of you. Both, like, I don't mind who answers this, but this is kind of like Ghazi's point. Basically, when I was younger, because I live in a Western country, I always had this thing that like Islam wasn't like, it wasn't really a part of me. Like now, as I've grown older, it has become a part of me. But when I was younger, it was always like, because I was scared of what people thought. And like, I was wondering, what would you like to tell younger girls who are struggling with like, you know, people who like make fun of them, or like just like, because it is a really hard thing to do, like because it's something changing. It's like a really drastic change. And I was wondering what you guys would like to tell all younger girls.
Wow, mashallah, I think that's a really, really good question. And I would love to know what advice you would give, because you sound really wise, mashallah, on this, and it sounds like something you've thought about a lot. So maybe you can answer. I don't know if you want to answer now or you want to answer after we've spoken, but Jezza, you've unmuted, go on.
Oh, you go first. I'll do it after. Like,
I think the reason I think it's such an important question is that I think it's something I've thought about so much. You know, as an adult, and I think even, you know, every year I think more about it, because I think I really agree with you. It's so hard to even articulate, I suppose, the levels to which you internalize narratives about Islam and about yourself. And I think we have a double whammy, I would say, of not only like all people of color do we internalize white supremacy and the desire to be seen through whiteness, to be seen as, you know, I'm more than my skin color, I'm human. And I think, you know, I spent so many years wanting to really prove, you know, I'm clever too, I'm funny too, I'm this too. But I think alongside that, we also have secularism, right, that says in a general narrative that there's something embarrassingly unmodern about believing in Allah. There's something embarrassingly unmodern about, you know, worshipping Allah, you know, fasting. And, you know, even to this day, I will go to conferences where people are really willing and excited for me to talk about Muslims as a racialized identity, as criminalized identity. But actually, when I say, oh, is there a prayer room? Then I'm met with that same, oh gosh, you actually believe in that whole, you know? And so I think what I have sort of felt in myself, and I suppose the advice I would give myself now, my younger self, would be that simple reminder, I suppose, that our honor does not lie with people, it lies with Allah. And I think it's as simple as that actually the only way to remove that pressure is to release yourself from the desire for that kind of acceptance. And I think that can only come, you know, through also fortifying ourselves in terms of knowledge of our own religion and history of our own religion and wider history as well. Because I think when we see that actually those internalized feelings that we have, those desires to belong, to be, you know, to not be excluded, to not be othered, to not be outsiders, are really A, valid, but B, that they come from a history of actually coercive attempts to assimilate us, coercive attempts to regulate us, to make us palatable enough that you can be different as long as you do not make a difference. And I think that, yeah, those kind of letting all that go is the advice I would give. And I know it's the irony that I think it's so much easier to say it, but to do it and to kind of make that transformation and to live it, it takes years. And I think it's still a process that we're all working through, right? I don't think any of us can say, yeah, hands up, like I've washed myself of kind of internalized secularism and white supremacy, because it's always there, it's always in the background. You know, I'm very aware that you know, small things, right, like being able to say that I went to such and such university or whatever, are the things that still people mark in their head as, oh, so she's a clever one, she's not like another. And you're still, you know, all times I think you're being made to fit into other people's imaginings of whether you're moderate, radical, you know, traditional, modern, all these ideas of who we are. And so my advice, yet again, is just, you know, don't see, because I don't think we'll ever achieve it. I think that's the ultimate thing. We will never achieve that belonging that I think we desire. And I think that's because, and this maybe is where my thoughts are at the moment, so much of my desire to be seen, to really be seen as human, I think is a desire that won't be fulfilled in this world. And I think that's because it's only in Allah's gaze that I will actually be seen for who I am, because only Allah can see my heart, only Allah can see my mind, only Allah can see me in my full context. And I think you know, that desire to be really truly seen by other people, that they understand me, that they don't just insult me, that they don't just reduce me to these kind of, you know, flat images of who I am, is, I suppose, something that maybe just doesn't, you know, that isn't for the dunya, that's not what the dunya is for. And so, yeah, I think that's where my thoughts are on it right now. But I recognize that that's easy to say, like I say, and I think maybe also, therefore, what comes with that is, you know, find people who think like you, find the people who you can surround yourself with, who can say to you, we accept one another, so we don't need the acceptance of others, and we're striving for a different future. We're not striving to become CEOs, we're not striving to become, you know, capitalists and border guards and whatever else. We're striving to become close to Allah, and that's a whole paradigm shift. Yeah, anyway, I could go on about that. It's a brilliant question. I think it's such a fantastic question.
Jazakallah khair. Sister Amina, do you have anything to add to that?
In some ways, yeah, I think Suhaim has covered most of it, but I think it is about, and maybe the challenge is more for our young girls, but it's about being, on the one hand, that this, you know, it's about your relationship with Allah, but even having before that the confidence to say, this is about my relationship with Allah. It is not about X, Y, and Z down the road. It's about me, and I am enough for me, and what I do is for the sake of Allah. And I think that is the kind of position that we need to work towards. It's easier said than done, but even for the next generation, thinking about raising our daughters and our sisters and our nieces to be able and comfortable to even entertain that as an idea, I think could be a step toward that. But I'm keen to hear Jaza's opinions too.
Thank you. So like basically, is as you were saying about family and stuff, I have a younger sister, and when I was younger, I wasn't as confident as she was. So basically, we talk to each other all the time, telling each other about school and stuff. And her would tell me all her school stuff, because she would always tell me when she was bullied at a young age. And then I told her what to do, because I felt that and I knew how it was. And I told her, and she overcame it. She overcame it way before I did. I overcame it when I reached high school, and yeah, there was that. She overcame it at a young age, and I really hope when she's older, she doesn't have to be scared of wearing the hijab, because I was definitely so nervous and scared. And talking about it, it's a really sensitive topic for me, because it was a scary time for me, because people would make fun of me. I was I got a lot of racism as well. Racism was quite a lot there. And I was just, it's just when I think back to it, it was, me and my family, we called it the dark ages, because it was it was bad. But now, as someone who's overcame all that, I'm scared to tell people, because I'm scared people will judge me. But I want people to know that I've been through what they are feeling, because we don't talk about it. We don't normalize that people are being scared of wearing the hijab. It's pushed away from us. It's oh, why are you thinking that? That's haram or whatever. And the fact that you can think that, it's something that every human should think about, because we are human and we do question things. And it's just I thought how so many people, just listening to this class, how so many people have the same everyone has the same mind basically, and you feel comfortable talking, and how I hope that one day our world just maybe has more acceptance. And I just wanted to tell everyone, whoever is struggling, that it's okay, and you won't overcome it fully, but you will feel like you have accomplished something one day. You definitely will. Thank you.
Mashallah, Jaza, mashallah. I'm sure it was inspiring for all our younger listeners out there, especially, and for those who like Suhaima and Sister Amina said, who are raising daughters and nieces and sisters and friends as well. When we talk about the importance of tackling Islamophobia to fellow Muslims, we often get replies of what our own faults are, or like terrorist actions, extremist actions. So that results in Islamophobia, or it results in saying that we're not doing enough to counter terrorism and extremism within our community. So how do we tackle that mindset?
That's another brilliant question. I think that, you know, kind of to go back a couple of steps, the immediate thought that comes to mind is, I think when people reproduce or regurgitate that idea that, you know, but what are we doing about Muslim terrorists in our midst? Really, I think, recognizing that is a narrative of Islamophobia, right? Like they're actually using Islamophobic narratives without realizing. And so I think, you know, there's different like angles you can use and strategies, right? But number one, I would say in this context is, you know, well, where's that coming from, right? Like where did you pluck that idea from? And I think actually helping people to contextualize that the reason that violence is over associated with Muslims is not because of a reflection of kind of some internal problem and inherent essence that we have, but it's because of historical, cultural, social context, and actually laying out a context for people and saying, you know, in these contexts where individual acts of violence occur, do you not agree that there are social contexts of violence, there are economic contexts of violence, there are, you know, international, national contexts of violence that are not dealt with, that are not talked about, that then make these ones seem exceptional, make them seem anomalous, and make them seem like they're just driven by the Muslimness of the person rather than any other conditional context. And I guess that's something that I think is really important, because I do like to believe that, you know, if you can contextualize and explain something to someone, sometimes that kind of helps get them in the right direction. But I think the other thing to say is that, you know, even if somebody won't listen to that angle, the other thing to say is that, hang on, one doesn't negate the other, right? Like this, it doesn't make any sense to say that, you know, we mustn't talk about systemic, structural, global justice of Islamophobia because Muslims do bad things. I mean, because that kind of applies to anything, right? Like, I mean, that's like saying that, you know, we shouldn't deal with kind of any kind of injustice that we face, or let's say poverty. We shouldn't deal with poverty that affects Muslims around the world because actually some Muslims are rich and they evade taxes and they tyrannize people and they, you know, engage in modern day slavery. That doesn't make sense, right? Because as Muslims, it's actually incumbent upon us to speak out against all injustice, whether that's against ourselves or against others. And so I think, you know, maybe making analogies like that, right, that say that that doesn't have any bearing on the fact that we must be speaking out against Islamophobia, doesn't have any bearing on the fact that we have to uproot injustice. And I think actually I would say, you know, if someone doesn't budge after all of that, I think that, you know, you kind of have to point out to them that they're invested in upholding, you know, the status quo, and that is, I would say, that's complacency. That's actually, you know, you're condoning oppressive circumstances. And is that something that, you know, is that something that you're willing to have on your conscience, I guess? Like, you know, even if we think about the hadith, if you can't change something with your hand, change it with your mouth. If you can't change it with your tongue, change it with your heart. I mean, in a context where you're saying, I don't want to change it because I see this other thing as a problem, I think you're creating this false sense that we can't deal with multiple things at the same time. And you're also, sadly, I would say in this specific instance, actually just regurgitating Islamophobia, because I don't think that personally, that's just to me, that's just a narrative that you've heard and that you're regurgitating. It's not actually something that you're deeply kind of considering, because if you were, I think you would actually make the connection that Muslims who perpetrate acts of violence live within a context of Islamophobia that actually creates many of the conditions that encourage and incite people to engage in acts of violence. So yeah, sorry, that was, you know, there's lots of different directions that my thoughts went in there, but I think ultimately, yeah, just kind of that idea that we don't have to, we should care about injustice wherever it is, I think.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges facing us today as well, because every time there is a terrorist incident, the Muslim community is quick to apologize, but what are we apologizing for? So, Sister Suhaima, you were saying that Muslim women here who have been through domestic abuse end up in prison rather than getting help from the police and social services, and also being stripped of their citizenship. So why is that happening?
Yeah, so what I was saying there was that if you look at statistics around women in prison, the majority of women in prison are survivors of domestic violence. And so it's a great question. Why is that happening? And I suppose the argument that I was trying to make is that because we presume that things like the police exist to protect us, right? That's the sort of normative understanding we have. Police exist to protect people. However, when we see and hear about statistics like this, and we understand that actually if I invite the police into my home, they're more likely to see me as criminal, me as suspect. Why? Because of all the training that they've done, because of the war and terror context, because of associating my body, my visibility with criminality. And so what you actually find is that in a lot of cases where, it often abusers and, kind of the perpetrators of violence in situations and I think this is like, it's the interesting thing about the language around this here, because what most women want in those situations isn't for actually their partner or whoever to end up in prison. And there's lots of research around this. It's not for their partner to end up in prison, it's to be safe and to have some sort of level of accountability. And I think what we have in the current justice system, and there's loads of work around this when it comes to domestic violence and sexual abuse, is that we don't really have any, what would justice look like, right? What justice would look like doesn't ever seem to come into fruition for many, many women and survivors, because instead the options they have are, send somebody that you love to prison, or through kind of the state actually identifying you as criminal. I mean, so just to answer one of the things you said there about citizenship removal or deportation or whatever, if you're an undocumented person in this country and you try and call the police as a recourse to justice, say, oh, somebody's harming me, they're going to come and you have to hide from the state yourself. You're the one who's, from the legislative point of view, you're the one who actually is criminal, right? On paper, you're criminal because you don't have documents to be here. And so how can, you're not going to be deemed a victim of harm when actually a legal system produces or sees you as harmful simply because of your identity. So that's what I was trying to get out for the person who asked the question. I hope that maybe puts a bit of context on it. And what I was trying to push us towards asking was, actually, are the structures that we're told or that purport to protect us, can they protect us? Do they protect us if they're also the source of harm? If counterterrorism police, on the one hand, raid your home and detain your family or people who look like you, can they also be your port of call for when something happens to you? And my answer is no, they can't. And therefore, I think we need to think about where we go to really, or we need to rethink what protection really looks like. We need to create independent ways of relying on one another and helping one another, and we have great practice of that in the UK. Throughout the 70s and 80s, you have Black and brown communities who created their own systems of self-defense. Again, because what you're fighting there is the state and people who are harming you. And I think, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
But Sister Suhaima, I mean, it's the enemy within, isn't it? It's, for a Muslim woman, it might usually be a Muslim man who is the abuser if it's domestic abuse. Exactly. So isn't that, contradicting things? So the police are not keeping us safe.
Yeah.
But again, the person in the house is not keeping the woman
safe.
Yeah,
exactly. I mean, my point is that that's precisely the point, right? That Muslim women are then left between a rock and a hard place, is kind of what I was saying, that where's our recourse to justice? Where are the systems that give us accountability? I don't understand what we're supposed to do in that situation where we're just left with nothing, and you have people on the one hand saying, you've got to protect this person, and on the other hand, actually you're trying to protect yourself. And like I say, that statistic is interesting to me about domestic survivors of domestic violence in prison, because it kind of suggests that actually women aren't believed and aren't listened to. And we know the police murdered Sarah Everard, right? Like the other month. And I think, police murder Black people all the time and brown people, and it's, suspicious circumstances in prison and all this kind of thing. And I just think, yeah, my point is, I'm saying I agree with you, Sister Zarina. Like, that's exactly the point. Where does that leave us? What do we expect Muslim women to do when there's no recourse to justice? And how can we stand before Allah and say, yeah, we're people of justice, but Muslim women, well, tough luck if you end up with an abusive husband.
Yeah, it's quite sad. I think we are running out of time, so we have time to take one last question. And I have a sister who sent me a question as well. So this is again to Sister Suhaima. You very brilliantly pointed out things like pointing out the lack of knowledge of English and the high birth rates of of Muslim women as signs of backwardness, as Islamophobia. So when Muslims themselves also say these things to label the community backwards and needing reform, can these be considered as strengthening Islamophobia at all?
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. I think reinforcing Islamophobia, definitely. But again, I think, I have a lot more I suppose I think that, like, it goes back to what we were saying earlier, you know, with those questions about internalizing Islamophobia. I think so many we've all internalized it to some degree, right? And I think sometimes when we reiterate those things ourselves, when we say, you know what, yeah, Muslims, I know they are pretty backwards, they are barbaric. Often what that person's actually looking for is acceptance, is actually looking to be, you know, told, well, you're a good one. You know, we wouldn't, you know, you're one of the ones that we like. And so I kind of see it as tragic. It does reinforce Islamophobia, absolutely. And it does strengthen it. And, you know, you see these are the people that are often, you know, invited into the newsroom to kind of talk about, you know, do you condemn, it's like, you know, what you Sister saying, Sister Zarina, that, you know, yeah, will you condemn this act of terrorism? It's often these same people who will be willing to do that, because with that comes acceptance, comes, you know, feeling of being seen. And so, yeah, my short answer to that would be, yes, I think so, but that's not the root cause, right? The root cause is not these people. And I think that's why I'd like to have a bit more sympathy there, and I'd like to go, okay, you know, you do your thing, do whatever you need to do, but like, where's the actual source of the violence? Because the other thing is, I think it can lead to a bit of, you know, divide and conquer tactics from top down, right? In the sense that if we're just turning against each other and saying, you're being complicit, no, you're being complicit, no, you're strengthening Islamophobia, no, you're, in a way, like, are we actually missing the root cause? Who benefits? Who's kind of, you know, still in the strength position?
Okay. So I think we're done for now, because we have one last question in the chat. If you want to quickly have a look at that, Sister Amina or Sister Suhaima. So it says, sometimes regional culture dominate the culture of Muslim community other than Islamic values, as we see in, you know, our communities, irrespective of the region where we live. Sometimes it strengthens and flourishes skill set and identity of the Muslim woman, but it has been seen that sometimes this regional culture oppress themselves and make barriers to define themselves and explore. So how can we tackle this?
I can comment slightly on that one. So I think this kind of relates to some of what I was talking about in terms of those intersectional struggles. So cultural struggles are not exclusive to Muslim women. Rather, there are women of color who are likely to experience these. But also, if we think about patriarchal societies in general, women in general are fighting against patriarchal structures that are designed to retain male power balances. So really, for the Muslim woman, this is a multifaceted, multi-layered structure, an intersectional struggle that she's more likely to be experiencing. I think it's also quite interesting that has been discussed throughout the discussions and debates we've been having here around this idea that if a Muslim woman calls this out, it is also weaponized against her and weaponized against Muslim men. In Muslim communities. And I think Muslim women, whether it's consciously or not, are often aware of this, that if I were to say something, what are the implications for Muslim men, or what are the implications for the way in which we're perceived? What are the implications for legislation when I'm being told this legislation that controls me, that regulates me, is to save me? Well, if I call out misogyny within Muslim societies, am I just feeding those narratives? So I think maybe I don't have an answer, but it's perhaps important to recognize the sort of broader systems of misogyny and patriarchal dominance within which we live, and understanding Muslim women's struggles and cultural struggles as being part of these and multi-layered within these.
Okay, Sister Suhaima, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's I think that's a great answer, and I think the question is too big for me to. I know I'll just go off on one. So yeah, but a great question.
Okay, so Jazakallah khair so much. I mean, you know, your session today has given us an insight into Islamophobia and its root causes and how it is among us as well. So inshallah, I hope each one of us listening today leave this session a bit more empowered and a bit more knowledgeable about Islamophobia and how to tackle it. And even a little bit of knowledge can go a long way. So on behalf of StriveUK and all our listeners here, I would like to thank Sister Amina and Sister Suhaima for giving us such a brilliant session. You know, it was so there was so much involvement from the audience as well. The questions were intelligent. Your talks were really empowering as well. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.